Hello, so we're at the end of Season 3 of Strive, and as of this video, we're bracing ourselves for Season 4. Arc System Works announced 2 patches, a smaller scale patch at the end of July that's meant to adjust some underperforming characters and some system mechanics, and a larger patch that is to come in between October and November. I figured a checkpoint video of this sort would be good to make. I want to share my honest thoughts in regards to Season 3 Bedman and what to potentially expect for Season 4. There's a lot to cover, so let's begin. Part 1. How good is Bedman? Relative to the entire roster of this game, it is of my opinion that Bedman is weak and within bottom 3. I'm not going to argue if he's the worst character in the game, because even if I win the argument, I still lose. This isn't the same as saying that Bedman is terrible. Bedman has some very strong things going for him in this game, and he represents a lot of unique options that can make certain matchups very uncomfortable for the opponent to play, and I don't think players should feel bad about losing to Bedman. However, Bedman is held back by a lot of design choices and weaknesses, both within the character itself and Strive being a pretty hostile game for a character like Bedman. This kind of video is prone to turning into a cathartic rant, so I kind of want to avoid that and just explain his weaknesses more in an informative manner. Part 2. The imbalance between the mid-screen and the corner. Perhaps the biggest general talking point with Bedman's strength and weakness is the huge difference between how he functions mid-screen and how he functions near the corner. The more cynical viewer watching this video will probably comment with something like, "Wow, your character is stronger near the corner than in mid-screen, like every character in this game." And that's true obviously, but my point isn't that he's weaker mid-screen, it's about how much weaker he is mid-screen. Bedman's Farslash and 2S are good normals in their own right, but a major problem is in his conversion ability. At the tip of these normals disjoint, there is no conversion possible. You have to be considerably closer to get a 2H conversion. In between these two distances, you have the option of going to a spin for a one hit confirm, but if you incorrectly hit confirm, then you have to RC to save yourself or face a close slash punish. Bedman's other pokes are also a bit redundant. 2D shares the same startup and horizontal reach as 2S with more limited Gatling options in exchange for a hard knockdown. 5H is also a worse Farslash in terms of both reach and frame data, and it also sends the opponent flying away mid-screen with no hopes of a hit confirm. Bedman's air normals are also difficult to convert off of for air-to-air confirms, with each normal sending your opponent flying away with little vertical launch. Conversions are highly arbitrary and often not worth the risk, because if you whiff the spin, you're eating a close slash punish. Now, one may think that errors may help with conversions, but single hit conversions benefit little from errors due to timing. It's incredibly hard to get a singular normal to string to another one right when your arrow is about to fire against an opponent who is actively moving around and trying to kill you. Imagine if Chaos couldn't fire his gun manually and it activates on a preemptive set timer instead. Suddenly for him, linking 2S into gunshots becomes a very difficult thing to do. Bedman's mid-screen confirm issues become very apparent when counter hits are thrown in. Typically a counter hit Farslash or 5H allows a character to route into a more unique combo for higher damage or a better knockdown. Bedman's Farslash or 2-hit counter hit only generally allows him to do the same combo that he could have done prior, as 2H is just guaranteed at all ranges, not even that much more damage. 2D counter hit isn't that much better, and 5H still sends the opponent to another country. Bedman cannot resolve this issue with White Wild Assault either, since his one is the White Wild Assault. White Wild Assault will do many things. It will skip neutral, pay my taxes, and massage my back, but it will not help with my conversion ability. On top of this, majority of Bedman's mid-screen combos do very little damage and lead to a weak knockdown, which is the spin. Bedman falls under a category of setup-focused characters, not quite unlike Chaos, Ino, Milia, Bridget, Testament, Jacko, or Zato. Basically, the idea is that these characters are not designed to always dish out a large amount of damage at every opportunity they get, and instead opt for setting something up with their first knockdown. Bedman does this automatically with a spin because it sets up the chain explosion error, but mid-screen chain explosion is a huge liability and even works counterintuitively for his confirms. Mid-screen spin situations require Bedman to work with mid-screen pressure sequence to try to stall for the chain explosion error to come out, and the best way to describe Bedman's mid-screen pressure is that it's like most of my first dates. I make a great impression at first just to realize that there's nothing actually there, there's no follow-up to it, and the girl is free to backdash away. Chain Explosion's penchant for pushing the opponent away makes it very frustrating to follow up on, both on hit and on block. Oftentimes you just have to give up your turn or take constant risk to apply pressure. DP characters have the time of their life and can buffer DP in many spots due to how inherently vague Bedman's pressure sequences can be. All of the issues I mentioned just now that he has mid-screen, his conversion ability, his damage output, chain explosion error being a spy for the enemy, none of that applies for the corner situation for the most part. 5H suddenly becomes the most useful combo component in this entire kit, and malfunction knockdowns are plentiful. Chain explosion no longer pushes people away since there's no real estate to push people out of. But the problem with Chain Explosion in a corner is that it could just wall break the opponent instantly, which is a major problem in itself. But with that aside, Bedman becomes a very dangerous character in the corner until you wall break the opponent and have to play mid-screen again. Wall breaks are generally very bad for Bedman, and the main reason is because his air movement is not good for actual movement, as strange as it sounds. It's great for being tricky and slippery at times, but if you want to move a set distance forward, it's not good for that. And this is very apparent in the post-knockdown situation after wall break. After a wall break with hard knockdown, his options for a safe jump are terrible, which requires him to take a more risky approach or use resources, or also mid-screen again with the same mid-screen problems. Part 3. A big body with mostly only its weaknesses. Bedman in Strive is categorized as a big body character that comes with severe caveats. Some of the notable ones are a 5-frame jump, huge hurtbox, one example being that he can't duck under Chip's 5P on the ground, which also means he's very fat in the air as well. A very heavy jump. For some reason, Bedman's super jump is nearly identical to his normal jump. A heavy backdash. Relatively poor movement. For Bedman's case, this is mostly about his mediocre ground dash and his lack of horizontal movement on his air dash. But on the plus side, Bedman gets White Wild Assault. Nice. Bedman having big body characteristics is very counterintuitive to what kind of character he wants to be. Part of this is by design, but some of it is just severe oversight from his transition coming from Exert. Bedman is largely a character that likes being in the air, but he's not well equipped for playing like this as other characters are. An example of characters with good air options would be Soul, Millia, and Chip. Soul's JH is a defensive wall of fuck you that still has legacy frame data, and he still has various air stalls in the form of Bandit Bringer to counterplay the opponent's anti-airs. Millia's air normals are insanely strong, and she also comes with Capel that raises her hurtbox above her tits because she needs it, I guess. Nearly all of Chip's options in the air manipulate his air momentum, and he's impossible to catch unless the Chip player themselves wishes to be caught. Bedman has some semblance of what these characters all have, but is severely limited in many ways. As mentioned earlier, his jump being 1 frame slower than an average character is already one thing, but having a sluggish air stall where he has to wait 12 frames before being able to act is another. Then there's him having a fat hitbox and being barely above the ground. Bedman is still heavily affected by the imposed 2-frame landing recovery that Strive has on all of his characters after they perform air actions. It's somewhat of a miracle that Bedman has an air game at all in Strive, and that's largely due to JH being able to crush 6P's lower hitboxes, because if that was not a thing, then I'm very positive that I can give a hitbox to a dog and it'll anti-air me consistently. There also exists some matchups where playing in the air is simply just not a good idea due to the nature of the opposing character's normals and the risk reward involved. At this point, Bedman has to bake on the ground game, but once you remember how lackluster his ground confirms are, then the options become severely limited. You play an air game with terrible risk reward, or play a ground game with terrible risk reward, or White Wild Assault and let Jesus take the wheel. Speaking of White Wild Assault, a large reason why big bodies abuse the heck out of this isn't just because it's egregiously strong. There's an element of burst economy to it because big body characters usually have the life to spare, at least 2 of them do. Potemkin and Gold Lewis are first and second in place in terms of their average life pool. Nago would be above Gold Lewis by raw numbers, but his blood gauge levels causes him to take more damage, which affects his life stability. Bedman is not even close to any of them. There's at least 9 characters that come before Bedman in terms of effective health. Bedman's life is deceptively low due to his guts being 0, which affects his ability to mitigate damage as his life gets lower. Big body hurtbox and movement without the big body life is a very dangerous combination to have. Now there's an argument to be made that Bedman is not a traditional big body character. He's graced with a great fireball and has the capacity to play a far away game to peck at the opponent's life. He also has the capacity to be slippery with his movement, even if it has a bit of jank with it. If his strategy and approach doesn't follow that of a big body character, then he shouldn't have his strengths, right? And my argument to that is that he shouldn't really have to have these weaknesses to begin with. That was exactly the case with Exert Bedman. Exert Bedman had a 3-frame jump startup, which is the fastest that a character could have. His jump went high, and his air hurtbox wasn't as massive as he didn't have any hurtbox on his legs. Rev 2 Bedman wasn't a strong character by any means, but his movement was his major saving grace in that game. Part 4. Strive in its current state is a harsh environment for Bedman. Bedman's goal in Strive is to use his airs to clear his approach so he can eventually push the opponent into the corner and suffocate them with looping pressure. The issue with this kind of goal in Strive is that it doesn't make sense, especially when compared to most of the current top tiers of the game. A typical good Bedman round is as such: you poke the opponent down a bit with your projectiles, you get a knockdown to spin, you use that knockdown to score another hit which pushes the opponent to the corner, you then proceed to loop pressure for a bit and inflict some chip and risk and eventually break the wall, then you earn the final hit and use your resources to kill them perhaps. A good soul round is as such: score a good hit and route into Red Wild Assault into wall break. Score a second hit and use the gain meter to kill the opponent with a clean hit Volcanic Viper, and if the opponent is still not dead somehow, just hit them once more. Now, I see myself being hyperbolic to some degree, but my point is that Bedman's strategy is very nuanced and convoluted in a game that is designed for characters to just murder you in a few hits. Slayer being the most recently released character in this patch is almost an irrefutable argument to support that, but remember, this is also a version where Sol, Gold Lewis, Nago, Leo, Mei, and Sin are very good. The only characters that bear a semblance to Bedman's game plan that is still good is Asuka and Chaos, and it's because their strengths heavily compensate for their potentially debilitating weaknesses on a nearly comedic scale. Bedman is trying to play this runaway fireball game in a screen size that's about the size of an affordable New York home. It's very risky when the opponent only needs to take a few steps to be within instant air dash threat of Bedman. Strive is a highly aggressive game, and Bedman is not a consistently aggressive character. Conclusion. So what now? As I was writing the script for this video, I wanted to be pretty fair in elaborating Bedman's good sides and his bad, but it quickly became to just me listing his bullet points on how he sucks. In a way, it's precisely how it feels playing him at times. There's moments of genuinely really cool and satisfying things that Bedman can do that is unique to him only. It's the reason I play him, but it does get frustrating having to fight my opponents who are figurative lions, and my weapon of choice is tickling. To circle back to what I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, there's a few patches coming up which may help Bedman. He's definitely not a well-performing character. Perhaps he's not performing well because he's actually weak. Perhaps he's not performing well because Bedman players are just bad. Perhaps fuck you if you actually thought that, and maybe you should try him out for a month and come back with a new perspective, you motherfucker. The new patches may help Bedman, but as mentioned earlier, there are some difficult issues that need some nuanced solutions, and the game itself is not particularly kind to characters like Bedman. All that can change of course, and it's possible where we could be in the future where we return to this video and reminisce about the golden days where Bedman was weak. However, I'm not too optimistic that this is happening. It's fine if the day never comes. I don't play Bedman because he's strong. He's the most interesting character to me in Exert and Strive, both from a gameplay and aesthetic standpoint. I'm also a masochist. Anyways, that's mostly it. Once the patch notes for July drops, I'll make a video on that. Otherwise, laters, and until next time.